when you are really successful in one era, it's really hard to say you got to write the next chapter. All the victories and all the championships you've won in your period of dominance, they are not a sofa to sit on, but a springboard to push you forward. I enjoy helping take the creation of somebody else and making it its full and best self. NetApp is an enterprise technology provider that's transforming over time to a software and cloud business. You have to reinvent yourself. You can't just buy your way into the next thing. You lose the energy and the risk-taking appetite of a startup. So you got to stay humble. You got to stay hungry to keep moving the business forward.
Do you ever go up to the city?
We lived in the city for 10 years. Yeah.
Who? You and
My
your wife?
family. Yeah. We lived in Pacific Heights.
Until when?
2019.
Until COVID?
Yeah. Right before COVID.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you like it?
We loved it. It was crazy, the commute for me, because I would go from the city to
I was just thinking
Sunnyvale.
that. From Pack Heights to Sunnyvale is, on a good day, an hour 10,
Yeah.
right? Like no traffic? Is that right?
Used to take me 3 hours a day. But
Would you stagger your commute?
I'm a super early bird. So I would get up at 6 and be in the office by 6:45.
And then would you leave before?
I'd leave at 3:34 and try to beat the traffic. And then, I'd do conference calls in the car or have a car service take me home.
Yeah, I even today, like, I'm almost neurotic about if I don't have calls while I'm driving up and down the 280. I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, this is a complete waste of time. Speaking of commuting to Sunnyvale, my first ever job was a startup that was in not the same space as NetApp and EMC, but a similar space. It was basically building a hypervisor that was at the very early days of the public cloud. That was basically an abstraction layer between all of the different cloud service providers.
Yeah.
Because the bet at the time was people are going to want to go to different clouds and shift workloads. Kind of like what you hear today with these LLMs. Everyone just says, oh yeah, we'll port OpenAI in and we'll pull in DeepSeek. And
Correct.
Anyway, we thought that in the early days, and it turns out people usually just pick a cloud provider and run with it. And then maybe if they end up acquiring a company, they'll have a little GCP sprinkled in or something, but that's about it. Anyway, it was wrong. The bet was wrong, but it was my first job out of school. And it was in Sunnyvale, and I used to live in the Mission, and I didn't have a car because I couldn't afford one after I crashed my previous one. and so I would bike over Potrero Hill, get on the Caltrain. And there is no, I'm sure you know this, there is no Caltrain at the time, there was no bullet train to Sunnyvale.
Correct.
Is that still the case?
There are bullets that go down to Mountain View, and then you can catch there's like a little VTA train.
But like, what a nightmare.
It was painful.
That's like what people do for the Niners games too, right? It's horrible. It's a horrible experience. So anyway, I used to do that. I'd put my bike on the Caltrain, and then, like, crank cold calls and emails up and down. I don't miss that.
It's called progress.
That's right.
You're making your way in the world, Jubin.
You have shitty jobs like that?
I did a lot of shitty jobs in my life.
Have you?
Makes me appreciate the job I have.
What's the worst job you've had?
I've worked my way through college. So I worked for like 30 to 40 hours a week while I went to Princeton, and I've done cafeteria crews, I've done construction, I've done parking cars, just lots of different jobs.
I worked at Subway, and I thought that was bad. And then I went and got my next summer job when I was in high school at Vaughn's, which is like Safeway. It's a grocery store.
Yeah.
And that was actually soul-sucking, like just bagging groceries all day. And right then and there, I made a pretty clear decision in my mind, like, just don't do this. Don't just like, I got to work hard to get away from this. When you were in India, you grew up in Bangalore.
Correct.
Did you work? Like, how old were you before you moved out here?
I was 18.
And you and your brother worked out here?
Correct.
Moved out here?
We came out to college together, yep.
And were you working before then? Is there a culture of working at a younger age in Bangalore?
In India, there is a culture, unfortunately, of the really poor where they have child labor. The middle class, that I was a part of, we didn't do work in the sense of, paid jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you go back?
Often, yeah. I used to go back many times a year, for professional and personal reasons. Now I go back about once a year for both professional, and I have a brother still in India.
And you opened an office, a NetApp office there, right? At some point?
We've had an office there since, I think, 2004, so a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you go visit that office.
Yeah, I was responsible for the site when I led the engineering group, and then we've now got a multi-function site, so it's the largest campus for NetApp in the world.
And are your mom or dad there?
They were. My mom passed 3 years ago. My dad passed almost 10 years ago.
Okay. And was mom or dad played a bigger role in your life?
Both of them did for different parts, but I think for the big influence who shaped me into the person I am is my mom, of course.
What would she say now? Your brother's the CEO of Google Cloud. You're the CEO of NetApp.
It wouldn't matter an ounce to my mom.
At all?
She would talk, nope, not a bit. She would talk about the fact whether we were good people, whether we were good parents, whether we had good values and treated the people around us well.
But in Indian culture, is it similar to Persian culture, which is what I am, where achievement matters a lot? Like, in my family, if you're not a doctor, dentist, or lawyer type thing, is that not a thing in your culture?
It is in Indian culture. But I think that my mom would say, if you weren't these other things, like a good human and you took care of your kids well and you treated the people around you well, then it doesn't matter what you do achievement-wise. You would not be, the child that she would want you to. She had made so many sacrifices for.
So when you would call your mom to tell her, I got promoted, I got the CEO job, I got into Princeton, I got into Stanford for my MBA, what would she say?
She would say, well done. And then she would say, well, have you called your daughter and made sure you're going to her play tomorrow that you committed to doing? Or she would say, hey, when you go to Princeton, you need to remember where you came from and the roots that you have and the humble origins you have. And remember to treat the people around you well, regardless of whether they're wealthy or not, regardless of whether they're accomplished or not.
Does that kid ever show itself today? Meaning, like, does the younger version of you ever rear its head in ways that you maybe don't want?
I listened to an interview by Brian Cox, the Scottish actor, a few days ago, and he says that you want to protect the little child and make that is part of the authentic you. And I think that it does show up. I think it shows up in the priority calls I make about where I spend my time. It shows up in the way I try to keep my office accessible to people of every rank in the company. And it shows up in the way that we try to keep the culture of the place flat so that titles don't really matter.
But everybody has titles, right?
Sure.
So how do they not matter?
You try to encourage in the meetings that you have, you try to make sure everybody's point of view is heard. You might have to make a decision at some point in one direction, but you try to make sure that people's points are heard. Before you make people decisions and policy decisions, you go and walk a mile in the person's shoes before you make decisions about kind of, hey, how do you organize sales, or how would a policy drive sales behavior? You go talk to the frontline employees and say, hey, you're a salesperson. How would this thing affect you?
When I had this guy named OJ on, I guess now he leads international for OpenAI, and he moved to Singapore. And the reason he leads international for them is because he felt almost claustrophobic raising his kids in this Silicon Valley culture. And his I think his daughter or son's friends would pick them up in Ferraris and Lamborghinis and the whole nine yards. And so he moved to Singapore and raised his kids there because he didn't want them to think that this is real life. How old are your kids?
My son's about to be 21 and my daughter's about to be 18.
Did you worry about that?
Absolutely, still do.
Do you really?
Absolutely.
Especially because you're rich now, right? Like they grew up with a lot of privilege relative to certainly what you did.
That's exactly right. I think that, you need to make sure that people have a perspective on what are the real needs of people in the world as opposed to the imagined ones. I think humans, regardless of where you grow up, always create a sense of need and a feeling of entitlement. And you got to be real about that. Yep. And we try to keep it real in the family by exposing them to different, kind of their cousins in different parts of the world, by traveling to different places. And when we lived in San Francisco, the Quaker school there was particularly good about taking the kids out in the mission and having them see some of the unfortunate people there.
Can you artificially create constraints with your kids? For example, if you and your wife are taking the kids on a trip to Europe and you fly first, are they flying first, or would you put them in coach? Are they getting on a private plane with you? Like, can you do that?
We fly economy whenever we can. That is not just my kids. It's my wife and I and them.
Why?
It's a way to just say, hey, coach is good enough. Yes, for certain long distance trips, you might fly them all business. But for many trips, you try to fly what everybody flies because it's good enough for everybody. It's good enough for us. I don't use a private jet. I don't think that that's appropriate use of, my personal or professional resources when there's so many commercial options.
What would your mom say if she saw that?
About the private jet, you mean? She would ask me, could you not fly a commercial jet or drive?
Is Thomas the same way, your brother?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
The most extreme example of this that I've ever seen is Jay Chaudhry, the Zscaler CEO. Commercial all the time, no handlers, walks around. I mean, he started 5 companies. Like, he's, I think, the richest Indian in America. And only stays at 4-star hotels, like, all the way.
Correct. I'm quite similar.
You are. And was there, did you make money at some point? Like, if you grew up not without money, usually, especially if it's not in America, I would imagine that you think about going to America, making it, being successful, getting money, and then living your dream life. Was that not how you thought about it?
I didn't think money was a major consideration in the ways that when I grew up. I think that the reason we came to the United States were, one was the Indian professional system was still very family run and family led. And so if your parents were not owners of a business, it was really hard to get to the top. And then in the late 80s, and 1990, the Indian economic environment was really difficult, right? I think the turnaround of India into where it is today started in the fall of 1990 and 1991, really, when Manmohan Singh got to be the finance minister. So it was a tough time economically, and there were less professional opportunities. I think if you ask me, what was my sort of dream scenario, it was to make sure I had enough money to take care of my parents when they got older. I never needed all the things that I have, and you never needed to be super wealthy to be happy.
Do you ever feel guilty?
You do feel that when you have access to opportunities and you grew up in a place where there were many kids who were not blessed with the parents that I had who created the opportunities for me, you know that you are not where you are because you're entitled to be there. It's because both people made sacrifices for you and you got lucky. And so the way that I treat that is to do the best I can with the opportunities I'm given. Some people say they're earned. Maybe they are earned, but you still feel like you got to do the best you can.
Yeah. The reason there's many reasons I was very excited to talk to you. One is because I know you are this way, and I think that's a rare type of leader in this part of town. But also, I think not only do you have a deep sense of humility, but your track record is also quite amazing. And I mentioned this to you earlier, but the company NetApp in the early 2000s and late 90s, throughout the 90s, I imagine, was the darling of tech companies, the darling. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, the stock peaked at $120 a share. And it was one of the it companies. Over the next 15 years, that stock bounced around from anywhere close to $20 to $40 a share. And you joined in 2011, about 10 years after the peak, when it was still bouncing around basically at the bottom, as an SVP of product, and then you did more product, and then ultimately became the CEO in 2015. When you became the CEO, the stock was roughly about $30 a share in 2015. And today, it's back to 120 at its peaks. And that's like in 10 years, less than 10 years. And in many ways, like, this is one of the great turnaround stories. It is amazing. And in some ways, it's almost still under the radar, because I think so much of people's association with a company like a NetApp or an EMC or any of these legacy tech providers, right, is that it's a has-been. You think that same thing about Oracle, and you look at Oracle stock, which is where you spent a bunch of time. It's in the same boat. Isn't that amazing?
It's a great story. I think the story of NetApp is one where a company that succeeded in one era of technology then kind of lost its way for a period of time and now has got onto both the next technology curve as well as has rebuilt the operating foundations of the company to be a third generation company, right? I think that's what the story is really about. And I think we in the tech industry, we love to talk about the first generation hot company. And then when they either hit a wall or they lose their way or whatever transition happens, they sort of, you never hear of them again.
What wave in the 90s was NetApp really riding?
Data storage and management was historically tied closely to the computer, right? And so every computing provider had their own storage technology. And so if you bought a computer for IBM, you would buy the storage from IBM. If you bought a computer from Sun, you would buy the storage from Sun. Then what happened was you had, with the advent of technical computing, the need to have the data be shared across workstations or computers.
Technical computing as defined
That's
by...
like silicon, semiconductor design, kind of the advent of workstations, right? Where you had really powerful applications that were running on the workstation, and it was essentially collaborative work where one workstation user was not the only one on the team that was contributing to the project. You had multiple people working together. And so you needed to keep the data shared across systems, and the advent of networking that allowed you to connect these data, kind of repositories with fast enough networks to computers. That was what drove the creation of NetApp. And we essentially became the platform for what we call files-based storage or unstructured data storage. And then we added on to that, kind of storage for databases called block storage, and a variety of what you call data management capabilities for security and multi-tenancy and other things over time.
And why did that come crashing down? Why did that come crashing down?
I think the growth in data centers slowed, over a period of time. I think there was a period when, kind of the internet first and then virtualization technologies drove kind of a transformation of the data center. And then subsequent to that, essentially the growth of on-premises data centers slowed quite dramatically. And then the cloud wave started up, right? So Amazon, Microsoft, and Google started to build data centers on behalf of end customers and build full stacks of not only infrastructure, but applications. And so more and more clients for whom technology was not their core competency said, hey, I would just rather rent infrastructure and apps from the cloud.
Yeah. Can you contextualize how insane the growth at NetApp was before you joined? Meaning, can you give a feel for people that might not remember this company back then, how crazy it was?
Yeah, like NetApp never hit 5 billion. We went from 4 to 6 billion in a year, right? So there's no...
Of ARR.
Of revenue, right? So there never has been a $5 billion year at NetApp. And so I think it was like a startup that had grown to multi-billion-dollar company. And I think that was also
$4 to $6 billion in a year.
Correct. And, we had some unique technological innovations that allowed us to dominate virtualization.
I think it also went like 0 to 100 or 1 to 100 in like a year.
Correct. So we had, both a market need for what we were building as well as a technological advantage in the way we built it that allowed us to scale really quickly. I think it also became a hindrance when you didn't have that growth anymore.
Do you think that if the culture was different, do you think the market still would have gotten away from NetApp?
I think that, there are two sides to that, right? I think that you need to have the ability to be humble enough to know when the chapter of the book that you have written, the masterpiece that you have written, the page needs to be turned, right? And you need to write the next chapter. And so teams that have succeeded in one era have a hard time believing that their era is no longer the prevailing era, but there's a new one. It's not like it's ended, but it's no longer the most important chapter of the book. There's a new one to write. And I think that was part of the challenge with NetApp. We were unable to see for a period of time that these new things were happening and we needed to capture them.
Do you think that's a byproduct of being a victim of their own success?
I think when you are really successful, and you see this in many, many, many technology companies, when you are really successful in one era, it's really hard to say you got to write the next chapter. Because writing a next chapter, you need to have the both the risk-taking appetite, but also the humility of being a startup all over again. That all the laurels and all the victories and all the, championships you've won in your, period of dominance, they are not a sofa to sit on, but a springboard to push you forward.
Don't you think part of the problem is that when you get to a certain size and scale, you've brought in so many people that changing that culture becomes so difficult?
Absolutely.
For example, we just had a company in our portfolio called Glean that does, I don't know, have you heard of Glean? Enterprise search, whatever. They do a bunch of interesting stuff. They're on all the graphs now of how long it took to get from 1 to 100. You know the
That's
graphs.
Right. That's right.
That all the VCs like to publish.
Yeah,
and
of course.
It took them 2.5 years or something.
Wow.
It's amazing. And this is true enterprise sales. This isn't PLG or anything like that. And I was giving a talk to their team, and I told them, I probably told them 6 months ago that you're about to be on all these fancy graphs. And the byproduct of that is that all the people that have been here building this company over the last 3 or 4 years were all the missionaries that were not really in it for the money because they could go make money in other places. They weren't really in it for the glitz or the glamour because they could go get a better gold-plated resume somewhere else. They were in it to do something above and beyond themselves. And there's this weird, almost disease that begins to, in my experience, incept these high-growth companies. That is, the people that come in because now you're on all the charts. You are the next high-flying company. And over time, that success attracts a certain type of person that over time kind of infects the entire organization with some feeling that this is entitled to us. Because they didn't see the work that it took to get to this point. Right. And, I think maybe that happened to NetApp. I don't know. But there is a disease that needs to be stamped out by the previous generation of people. Take your sports analogy. Kobe would stamp out that disease.
That's right.
He would stamp it out. Steph does the same thing. Does that make sense?
I think there are multiple reasons why organizations, often don't catch the next wave or don't build the capabilities you need timely enough, right? I think there's multiple reasons for it. The big companies, the very large ones that have been successful over multiple eras, face this as well. I think that their path to the next chapter is easier. They have so many resources, they can buy their way in and so on. But for a smaller company like ours, that's not, tens of billions of dollars, you have to reinvent yourself, right? You can't just buy your way into the next thing. I think the reasons you outlined are some of it. Clearly that you lose the energy and the risk-taking appetite of a startup, that, the really hard work that you need to build a second business, right? I think that's certainly part of it. I also think that when you get really successful at one thing, many, many people tend to believe that we're better than we really are, right? That, hey, there was timing, there was, kind of compelling need. And yes, we were really good at what we created, but maybe timing and compelling need are no longer as pervasive, or there are other alternatives. And so you got to stay humble. You got to stay hungry to keep moving the business forward.
And when you joined in 2011, you had you had already had a great career at that point. 5 years at Oracle, 4 years at McKinsey, a few years at Akamai leading product. These are great companies. Then you go to Cisco and you spend 10 years there. Again, at the time, was an amazing company. It feels to me like you could have had your pick at a lot of different companies at that point. And maybe I'm curious about your decision making to go to a company like NetApp, which at the time was, like I said, kind of bouncing around the bottom.
First of all, I'm fortunate to have worked in a lot of places that have shaped me to be the person I am today. I think there's a collection of experiences and friends from each of those parts of my career that are still with me today, right? And my wife, for example, was I met her when I was at Akamai, and so I have a lot of great opportunities that were given to me on each of those career steps. I think when I left Cisco, I was interested in, working at a place that had good values. NetApp was always seen as a place that treated our customers well, that treated the employees fairly, and had a culture of respect for, every stakeholder. I think that, it wasn't as important to me to be on the hottest company or the fastest, technology curve, because I'd seen many of them. And I knew that I think what's more enduring about an institution is the people that are part of it rather than just the tech trend that it's on, because those tech trends come and go.
And how would you assess the state of the business at the time that you joined? If you were giving an honest assessment.
I think we had done extremely well the couple of years, prior to my joining. We had caught the virtualization wave. On the other hand, there were several things that were sort of, that we had been slow to do, right? I think we had been very slow to build out our scale-out technology. And my predecessor as CEO wisely told us to go build that, even at the cost of slowing down the business. It was kind of like the next big thing to get done. I think we had, not changed the team at the top to be the people who had seen scale. So we had a business that had reached $6 billion scale, but with a lot of people that had never seen $6 billion in their life before. And so the operating fundamentals of the company were like an overgrown startup.
When you became CEO, it took 4 years. 4 years later, do you remember your first all hands? Do you remember the first time you stood in front of the company and created a list of, here's what we're going to go do?
I think that, first of all, I was extraordinarily surprised to be told that I was going to be a CEO.
Actually?
Absolutely.
You weren't putting your hat in the ring?
Nope. I had no idea. It was actually, it's a funny story. And if you don't mind, I'll tell you the story.
Tell me.
I was headed to the 25th reunion of my college of Princeton. And I was on my way to the airport when my assistant said to me, the chief human resources officer wants to meet you. And I was like, hey, I've submitted all my annual paperwork for my employees. I've done my reviews. It's all in your inbox. And my assistant said, no, she really wants to meet you in person. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to have to rush it because I'm running late to catch my flight. So I went up to her and I said, hey, Gwen, what's up? I'm in a rush. Can I help you? Is there something quick? And she said, no, you need to sit down. And I saw 2 board members. And I was certain that I was getting terminated. I looked at her and I said, what did I do now? And she said, no, you need to listen to these guys. So they told me, it was a Thursday, and they told me that I would be named CEO. And I said, well, I'm sure we can, have that conversation when I get back. I'm trying to catch a flight. And they said, no, we're going to announce it on Monday. And I remember telling them, are you crazy? And I said, we're going to need to hold a minute. I need to talk to my wife and kids and make sure that they're okay with it. And I called them and I talked to them, and they said, hey, this is a great opportunity for you. And I said, what are you worried about? And they said, well, will you be there for our games and our plays? And I said, I promise you that I'll be there. And then I called my mom and I asked her, what does she think? And she said, listen, there's no downside. As the only downside is if you get caught up in being a CEO versus just being the person you are. And so we held an all hands on Monday. And perhaps the most important thing I did at that all hands was to actually have the outgoing CEO speak to the employees, because I wanted him to know that he had put in every ounce of effort he had to take the company to where it was. Yes, we had a challenging few years, but it was not because he wasn't given everything he had. And because he gave me the opportunity to come to NetApp. And so I think that was well received by our employees.
Did you go to Princeton? Did you go to your reunion?
I went on the next day, on Friday night. So I stayed, did all the work to plan Monday, and then went, yep.
And when you called your wife, what was the hesitation?
I wanted to make sure that I had her support to take on the role that I was going to take. I knew that it would come with some sacrifice. It always does, right? From your family and other, loved ones that you have. And I wanted to make sure that it was okay by them. It was not a decision I was just going to make by myself.
But you were still a, fancy executive reporting to the CEO. Like, you still had a huge job at that point. You were already making sacrifices.
Absolutely. I know that my family and my loved ones, made extraordinary sacrifices to allow me the opportunity to do what I do, right? On the other hand, I had no idea what being a CEO was like. Nobody does until you actually become a CEO. But I knew it would require, things that I probably hadn't contemplated before. And I wanted them to be supportive of taking that path with me.
Mm-hmm. And when you did it, did you think that, were you surprised by anything? Meaning, just maybe using the sacrifice lens, were there things that you didn't expect to sacrifice that you ended up having to?
No, I think I'm the proudest thing that I have maybe as, beyond all the usual external accomplishments of value creation and, employee scorecards and all those things, right? I think the most important thing to me has been that I'm still dad. That's my most important job. And I never compromised on things that were really important to my kids and my family. Yes, there have been times where you travel, but the day after I did that first company all hands meeting, my daughter was at a play and I made sure I went to that. It was in the middle of the day.
What time? So, like noon?
11 o'clock in the morning. And I was there for that.
How?
It was on the Tuesday. Monday was all hands. Tuesday was that, and I said, listen, happy to take calls after that, but I am going to that play because I had made that commitment long before I was named CEO, and I intended to honor it.
And how often did you feel the tension of your work commitments to your family commitments?
You feel it all the time, every single day. I think my mom told me this important lesson. She said, you don't have time. You make time for the things that are important.
Does that tension weigh on you?
You get better at managing the priorities. You get better at delegating over time as you strengthen your team. And you also get better at asking questions as, is this the thing that only I can do? Or can someone else do it? And I think that helps. But it also is related to the habits and practices you have. I have an integrated calendar, one calendar that combines all my personal and professional responsibilities. And I review that calendar every month and every quarter to make sure I'm balancing it correctly.
Integrated meaning your daughter's dance would be on the work calendar.
Correct.
As a block of time. Correct. Similar to the meeting after that.
Correct. So that she has a voice on the calendar, just like, someone else at my workplace.
And was there a difference in the tension that you felt once you took the CEO job versus before? Meaning, was there more of a demand on your time, your attention, or frankly, just the responsibility that comes with the job relative to what it was before taking it on?
There are a lot more stakeholders that a CEO has to deal with than a chief product officer. You've got to balance so many stakeholders, right? And I think so that's a lot of demand on your time. There's also a lot more external commitment. You have to spend a lot of time with people outside of your business versus internal commitments that are probably a little bit more flexible time-wise. And then I think that with regard to this, my first few years at NetApp, we were in a turnaround. And so it was a really all-consuming effort to get the company turned around.
Did you doubt at any point that you were ready?
Often did.
And when you doubted, did you just work harder?
I think, for me, I think there were a group of friends that I had, in my professional career who knew me a long time before I was named CEO, who would give me honest feedback and also I knew had real belief in me. I was fortunate to have some of them with me at NetApp. I think the second is, my faith helped a lot. And then the third is you've no choice. So you just got to get on with it. I'm not one of those that sits around and mopes about what opportunities I might have had. I'm like, I'm in this job and I got to make it work. There's 12,000 employees or 13,000 employees that depend on you, and you got to just get on with it. And I think most CEOs probably just do that.
And when you go to other CEO friends today, your brother could be a starting point, but surely there's more. What do you find yourself seeking the most from them? What types of questions are you asking them, people ahead of you and where they might be? What are you looking for from them?
I think a lot of the questions revolve around decisions that a CEO has to make that are lonely decisions. I think that the CEO job is a fairly lonely job because you are between your team, which, you want to be friends with them, but you are also not a peer, right? And then the board who are your advisors, but, they're, in some sense, they're your superiors, right? Not your sort of friends. And so there are often decisions that you have to make which are quite lonely. And so those are the decisions that you seek advice on, or things that, you find your business has never faced before that another business might have faced. Those are two examples that I talk to other people about.
Yeah. When does it feel loneliest? What types of decisions? People, like turning people over, basically?
I think one of the hardest decisions was when we were starting our cloud business, which is writing the next chapter of the book I was talking about.
Which was like 1 to 2 years into your tenure?
Correct.
Yeah.
We had been a functional company for the history of our business. We had never created a division structure or even a business unit structure and sustained it. And I felt that to do cloud well, you had to do something totally different than what the company was used to so that you could attract the talent, so that you could build the financial structure and allocate resources and capital to it, so that you could build the partnerships in a way that wouldn't conflict with your traditional partner base, and so on. And so that was, everybody in the management team at that time said, why would you do that? You should keep it functional. And then you had to go against the grain to do that. And so that was a fairly lonely decision.
The tension between your team and you is a super interesting one, meaning you're right, you do want to be friends with them. In many ways, you are friends with them.
Absolutely.
But do you create space intentionally to make sure that you can effectively lead?
I think, you want to bring people along on the journey with you, right? That is super important because no single person can take an organization to where it needs to go. All of our success over the last decade has been entirely because other people have come and joined the journey, right? And have contributed. Some have stayed, some have moved on to other, chapters of their career. But we wouldn't be here without others having contributed significantly on the journey. Now, on the other hand, there are times when you have to step back and say, I see a pattern that my team is not seeing, or, do I think that we can do a better job than we are doing? And there is a period where you need to step away from things and constantly keep your finger on, is this the best that we're doing? And why is it that things are this way? And sometimes in that period of pause, you may not have, all of your team on the same page because you probably are ahead of them, or maybe you're bringing some uncomfortable facts to the table. And so you need to create that degree of separation so that you can have a clear perspective. It's also when external perspective is really helpful, right? Because you may not have the whole picture, and so you want to go test it out. And you can test it out with your peers, you can test it out with advisors, and so on.
What wave is NetApp riding now, and where do you think you are in that wave? Because the growth is striking.
We are in the data wave, right? So we've always been a data management company. I think that the way that we used to do the data management was typically through selling storage systems to customers to deploy in their data centers. We caught the next wave of that model, which was, hey, how do we win in the world of cloud, where we took our core technology, and by working with the hyperscalers like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, we have now created services that they sell to their clients using our technology. And we are super grateful for their willingness to work with us. It's kind of been a co-creation exercise over many years, right? I think that now allows us a hybrid cloud data platform. And on top of that, we are layering on additional services so that people can search for their data, they can catalog it, they can get it ready for AI by using much more streamlined, embedding and RAG capabilities. We're building in tools for really advanced security protection and so on. And so those are some of the waves that we are riding right now.
Do you have a, in your mind, do you work backwards from a logical conclusion of how this ends for you?
I think that it's very hard to predict the future 5 years out now, right? And so what we try to do is we look in a disciplined fashion at trends. And I think the most important part of that is the trends that you say no to versus the trends that you say, yes, I want to capitalize on. And then we look at scenarios, right? We say, hey, what do we believe is true over the next year to 2 years? What do we believe has a binary outcome based on some decision or regulation or external circumstance or technology breakthrough? And what are truly uncertain outcomes that you really can't figure out? And then we try to build plans which say, here are some no regrets moves that we got to start with, and we operate like a startup. Let's go get 10 customers to advise us. Let's build prototypes. Let's see if they're engaged. And in the early part of a new opportunity, it's really, really important to know that you're reading the customer right, and that there's a consistent pattern that becomes obvious across a broad group of customers, right? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 50? Right? But in that range.
You've been at the heart of many of these tidal wave trends. Where do you see the AI trend today relative to previous ones?
I think AI, what's been interesting is some of these trends are more prevalent in consumer than in enterprise. It used to be that many technologies were created in the enterprise and then found their way as things got miniaturized and cost reduced to consumer. I think that has changed over the last, decade or so, where the scale of the consumer opportunity allows you to, kind of bring technologies there and then bring it to the enterprise. So I think the consumer AI wave is ahead of the enterprise AI wave. I think in the enterprise, which is our focus, there are clearly some opportunities that are ready today, right? Software development, simplifying certain elements of customer support, using AI to make your products and services better. Those are all there. I think in terms of broad scale transformative use of AI, I think we're still a couple of years out, maybe a few years out.
Do you feel contrarian saying that in the Valley?
I think that's I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I'm just trying to say my truth based on what we see with our clients. I think that we in Silicon Valley love to we fall in love with a new trend, right? And I think, for that trend to be a market phenomenon, you cannot just believe that early adopters are bought into that trend. The early majority and the mainstream market need to see the value of that. And so what I'm reflecting is not that, hey, there are not lots of experiments and early adoption going on, but actually where the mainstream market is.
It's interesting. I spent a bunch of time with large CIOs, and one of the things that really surprised me was over the last couple of years, how much on the front foot these enterprises were to adopt these new technologies. And part of that was just what felt like pressure from their CEOs and board to, in air quotes, go adopt AI. And so everyone seemingly did the similar set of like mapping to business processes, landed on a similar set of processes, right. Coding, support, right? I got a few of them. And now we've kind of, at least in the enterprise, to your point, pumped the brakes and said, let's see these things through first. Let's see where this takes us. And then, let's actually deliver on the promise of automating 30 to 40% of a developer's code, because they're not there yet. And then we get to move on to some of these other things. But the appetite for a while, and even now, but for a while, was voracious. And that was different than, let's just say, the public cloud era, where it was typically the tech companies that were adopting the public cloud. But in this case, that's something that I haven't been able to totally reconcile, is how much demand and dollars are being spent in the enterprise to, again, do AI, whatever that means.
When the cloud is more of a technology transformation, right? It is certainly an enabler to go faster. It's an enabler to be more flexible. But until the cloud delivers new applications, it's mostly a technology transformation. And so, CIOs were probably like, hey, what's the business sponsorship for these migrations and these use cases? I think AI is very much business-led. Listen, when you have an opportunity to improve productivity, like with some of the numbers that you're talking about, every CEO believes in it, right? And I do too. I'm pushing our teams to do more with AI. I think that to really capture those benefits, as you said, you need to have the change management, the business process re-engineering to really make those new ways of working happen. And I think that takes time. I don't think that it means that the technology does not have great promise or, is a technology that we in the world need to help us make progress. But I also believe that it takes time to adopt such a transformative technology.
Do you and your brother, I'm really curious. I think I asked your brother a similar line of questioning, but like, is he ever looking at your job and thinking, I'm kind of jealous. Like he's the CEO of the parent company, meaning he just reports to the board, and he's been able to put his whole fingerprints all over this company. And, you know, for you, it could be the reverse version of this, which is you run a whatever. Well, it's a gigantic business. You're the CEO of Google Cloud. Everybody, you know, like you're on the bleeding edge. You don't have to deal with the board directly.
I think everybody has their own opportunities and challenges. I think for me, you know, NetApp is an enterprise technology provider that's transforming over time to a software and cloud business. Google is a software and cloud player trying to transform into an enterprise business technology provider. And I think that it's been interesting to compare notes about the challenges with, you know, with pedigree, right? You start in one place and you now got to go to another place. And the challenges are quite similar that both of us see.
Have you not been tempted to start your own company?
I think for a long time, the responsibility to family and other things said that, you know, I needed to build a predictable financial platform for taking care of my parents and other things. And I just felt that it was important to do that. I think that I enjoy helping take the creation of somebody else and making it its full and best self. I think part of what I have really liked about the journey at NetApp was something that Quakers, you know, my kids went to a Quaker school in San Francisco, and what Quakers teach, which is the importance of, you know, kind of conservation, of taking something that was beautiful and once and then making it new again. And beautiful again. My kids went to school in the old Levi Strauss denim factory in San Francisco. And what's been nice about that story is that it could have been just discarded and ripped down and a new modern building would have been created. But San Francisco would have lost a piece of its history. And the Quakers actually have taken over that building and made it all beautiful and new again. And a whole bunch of kids get to experience what life must have been like in San Francisco. And so NetApp is similar. You know, we are trying to take what was beautiful and, you know, kind of the bleeding edge of the, you know, technology and sort of recreate it for the next few eras. And more importantly, not the technology, but the sense of purpose and the sense of aspiration of the organization.
There was a quote that I read that it said, talent and success is not determined by your innate ability, but by persistence. And I'm curious, when you're hiring, the challenge with this quote, because I think everybody believes it when they hear it, is you have someone that has pedigree. They've seen 6 billion of scale. They have experience hiring people. They have all the fancy logos on their LinkedIn that show some version of success that they've seen great. And it's easier to test for that. It's easier to look at someone's resume and make a judgment call about what they will be. Versus persistence, I mean, it doesn't show up anywhere.
And I think this is, you know, part of the, you know, discussion around, you know, diversity. It is also the discussion around, you know, what kind of people you try to recruit at the firm, right? Or at the business. I think when I look at it, there's probably 3 things I look at. One is it's really important to know the distance a person has come in their journey versus where they're now, right? Because two people that started in very different places can be at the same place in their career, but one's come a really long way. And that shows character, and it shows their ability to navigate difficult situations, right? And so that's one of the framing lenses of how I think about opening up the opportunities in the company to people with very different backgrounds than those that always graduated from the top schools and so on, right? I think the second is you want to know whether someone's been a driver or a passenger, right? And what I mean by that is there are lots of people that come into great companies, but the greatness, like you said, we talked about earlier in the discussion, the hard work was done much earlier, and now somebody is just riding on a platform that someone else has created. And so it's important to find a way to distinguish that by asking the hard questions of what was your unique contribution and what did you do during your time at that place. And then the third one is what I call eating glass, right? As somebody had to deal with an extraordinarily difficult circumstance, it could be a circumstance that happened to them or a circumstance that they created, but how did they work through that? And most people don't put that on their resume because it's not glamorous to say you made mistakes or you were in a very difficult period. Most people want to say that it was smooth sailing. And so you've got to, I look for those three things.
I appreciate you doing this.
You're welcome.
I really do.
Thank you for having me.
I was really excited to just hang out. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Are you hiring?
We're hiring selectively.
Any key roles?
We are building a lot more intelligence into our own products. So data science, some advanced data science and security capabilities that we're looking for. And also people who are quick learners, because what I've found is a lot of our cloud journey, yes, we did bring people who had cloud expertise, but a lot of it was done by people who were just really interested in learning the next thing.
When you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
My wife's of Finnish origin, heritage, and so she talks about the word called sisu, which is a Finnish word for resilience. You can have a bad day, but the next day you pick yourself up and go at it just like you went, it's a brand new day.
Sisu.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you.